Mr. Mulvaney, in December, the Bureau announced that it was eliminating penalties to lenders for errors in mortgage reporting, and that it plans to reconsider its Home Mortgage Disclosure Act rule, which could mean allowing lenders to omit information critical to understanding lending patterns and policing discriminatory practices. And in January, you reorganized the Office of Fair Lending and Equal Opportunity, and you stripped the office of its enforcement powers. This is the office that Congress, remember that? I think you served in the other house, didn't you?
I'm familiar with it. Yes, sir, I've heard of it.
Yes, okay. So Congress charged in the law with combating predatory lending practices, the very practices that contributed to the destruction of nearly half of African American and Latino household wealth during the crisis and Great Recession. Don't these actions send a clear message to lenders that the Bureau is pumping the brakes on vigorous oversight and enforcement of the federal fair lending laws?
Not at all. And I could deal with HMDA separately, but let me deal with the Office of Fair Lending, which is, fair lending actually has several things that it's supposed to do. It does enforcement and supervision, and it also does education in one area. Okay? Within the OMB, the system that I inherited from the previous director, actually supervision and enforcement is in one place and education is in another. And all I have done is to move those things into the appropriate category, the appropriate...
But it was Congress that said that this department should do enforcement, not your judgment.
Actually, I think you gave me a great deal of discretion over what they do and what they don't.
Let me tell you what the message has been that's been received by lenders.
Right.
In a February memo to its clients, who include Bank of America and Deutsche Bank, one law firm said, and I quote, "On January 31st, we witnessed a major, concrete change with the announcement that the Office of Fair Lending and Equal Opportunity would be removed from the CFPB's Supervision, Enforcement, and Fair Lending Division. The removal of a supervision and enforcement team focused exclusively on fair lending issues will significantly reduce the CFPB's enforcement." So let's be clear. We're not going to stand by while you thwart the statute and subvert congressional intent, nor will we be silent while you give winks and nods to lenders that they will no longer be subject to vigorous review of their activities under the fair lending laws. We're not going to do that. And I don't know how you think you can usurp congressional intent, but it's not going to go unchallenged. In a January op-ed you published in the Wall Street Journal, you said that the Bureau would no longer be, quote, pushing the envelope when it comes to enforcement. In the 137 days since you took over the Bureau, you have not initiated a single new enforcement action. The scandals and breaches of consumer trust at Wells Fargo and Equifax demonstrate that consumers need the CFPB now more than ever. Equifax's egregious failures compromise the personal information of an astounding 145.5 million consumers. Consumers are understandably concerned about identity theft and fraud. They're concerned that they won't be able to get a fair rate the next time they go get a mortgage or a car loan because Equifax failed them. In 2017, consumers submitted more complaints to the Bureau about consumer reporting agencies than any other product or service, something you said should help guide the Bureau's actions. But yet yesterday, in testimony before the House, you reiterated your commitment to scaling back the Bureau's activities, saying, quote, "Regulation by enforcement is done. We're not doing it anymore," unquote. So, Mr. Mulvaney, does that include eliminating enforcement actions under the Bureau's authority to prevent unfair, deceptive, abusive acts and practices?
Do you know what regulation by enforcement is?
Can you answer my question? I'm not here to answer yours. Answer my question.
Regulation by enforcement is where people find out that you accuse them of breaking the law after you file a lawsuit against them. That's what I stopped. I believe you have the right to know what the law is before I sue you for breaking it. Under previous leadership, Mr. Corey believed it was actually okay to change years and years of practice. In fact, there's a major lawsuit, I think, that is being considered right now over this exact issue, where there was an entity, I think it may be from your state, as a matter of fact. In fact, it is resident in your state, that was acting under the assumption that a HUD guidance from decades, that had been enforced for decades, was still good
Well,
law.
obviously,
And
rulemaking needs, always has a notification and a process before
No, it
it goes
doesn't.
into effect. But in addition to enforcement activity, the CFPB has rulemaking authority to prevent unfair, deceptive, or abusive acts and practices. That's the primary way that the Bureau can prevent consumer abuses by consumer reporting agencies like Equifax. And your most recent regulatory agenda, including, does the Bureau's most recent regulatory agenda include a rulemaking to protect consumers from failures and abuses by consumer reporting agencies?
I'm sorry.
Does
there a
does your agency's most recent regulatory agenda include a rulemaking to protect consumers from failures and abuses by consumer reporting agencies?
It does. That's in the statute, and I think my predecessor was there for 5 years and didn't do it either.
Well, my understanding is that it's not. So if the Bureau doesn't intend to use its enforcement or rulemaking authority to prevent unfair, deceptive, and abusive practices like companies like Equifax, I don't know how you intend to hold Equifax accountable and protect consumers from future catastrophes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We have
Senator Rounds.
Yeah, thank you.